We're discussing the issue that there was a debate about whether you could play the musical instruments, the chalil specifically, the flute, on Shabbos and Yontiv. Debate between Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda, and the Chachamim, and the first position of Rabbi Yosef was that they're debating the one that was played with the korban, and could be played, on any Shabbat. The music that goes with the normal korbanot. And the debate was how much is that the ikar avodah of the Levi'im and central to the avodah of the korban, or how much is it the singing of the Levi'im, and that's the debate. But when it comes to the musical instruments that are played on the night, on Sukkot, the night before, the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, etc., everybody agrees that that's just Simcha, and that cannot be done on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Again, the phrase of Dochet HaShabbat is interesting because we're all dealing with rabbinic issues here, and why this is perceived of as such a problem is a little unclear, but be that as it may. So the Gemara wants to say that, so that's Rabbi Yosef's approach, that this is really a debate of what's central. Is it the, is it the vocal singing, or is it the music that normally it comes with the pouring of the libations of a korban? And the Gemara says like this: Amar Rav Papa, says Rav Papa's last three words on the Nun Amud Bet, top of Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph now. Kitanoi, this question, if Ikar Shira B'Peh, or Ikar Shira B'Kli, if the basic Shira that's supposed to come from the Levi'im and accompanying the Korban is the singing, or is it the music? This is a debate of Tanaim. Tanan, that we taught in Mishnah, should be Avdei Kohanim Hayu. Who were the people that played the music? Not did the singing, but played the music. So they were slaves of Kohanim. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's what Rabbi Meir says. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Mishpachat Beis HaPagrim, Mishpachat Beis Tziparaya, these are two names of two families. Ume Ammaum Hayu, and they were from a place called Ammaum. Shahayu Misi'im Lekuhuna, they were not themselves Kohanim, they were Yisraelim, but they were from good yichus, and their daughters would, or Rashi says, their widowed wives would marry, would marry amongst the Kohanim. The Kohanim would particularly be interested in women from these families because they were, although they were Yisraelim and not Kohanim, they were of good yichus. So basically, he says they were of mishpachot miyuchasot of Yisrael. That's his position. Rabbi Chanina ben Antignos Omer Levi'im Hayu. No, the Levi'im were the ones who played the music instruments. Whenever we imagine playing the musical instruments in the Beit HaMikdash, I think we always imagine the Levi'im. But it's quite fascinating. It's only one of three opinions here. My lav b'hakimifliki. Is it not that this is their debate? The mandam avadim hayu, the one that says that they were slaves, kasavar ikar shira b'peh, holds that it was really, it couldn't be that the basic avodah of the Levi'im, that accompanied the Korban, was the music, because then how would you let slaves do it? So it must have been that it really was the singing that was the ikar avodah, and therefore when it came to the music, that you could have the slaves do it, the slaves of the Kohanim. Umanda Amar Levi'im Hayu, and the one that says no, they were Levi'im, kasavar ikar shira b'kli, that no, the basic avodah of the Levi'im was the music, and therefore it had to be Levi'im. So basically, meaning what the Gemara is trying to do, which is fascinating, is that the Gemara is saying, they're not really debating the facts. Maybe they're sort of like debating like what it could have been, or what it should have been, based on their understanding of what was necessary about what was the real avodah. So if you think the real avodah was the music, so then you say, oh no, it had to be the Levi'im. If you think the real avodah was the singing, then no, probably could have been someone else. But of course, it's a little funny because it's way too specific to be talking about a legal point. It really seems like you're talking about a debating historical facts. And let's see, and that's what anyway the Gemara is going to respond. The Gemara says, "V'tispera." Does that really make sense that they're having a legal debate here? If that's true, and the question, though, Rabbi Yossi Micah Saba, when Rabbi Yossi says no, it was miyuchas families of Israel. What's his position? If he holds the basic avodah, the basic thing that Levim did was singing, so then afilu avadim nami, then he should in principle say it would be okay to have avadim. If they're not debating facts, if they're debating what would be acceptable, he should have no reason to object to the avadim. And if he said it was basically the music, so Levim, so it would have to be in Yisraelim. Well, it would have to be Levites and not Yisraelim. So they're obviously not debating what it could be. They're debating because A, it's too specific, and B, it doesn't explain the position that was the middle position. So obviously they're debating what it was, not what it could be. Ella says the Gemara rather, but of course realize that if they're debating what it was, even if that's true, the two positions that hold that it was not the Leviim must, even if they're just talking about facts, what emerges from the facts that it was not Leviim is that Ikar Shira B'Peh, is that the Levite service was not the music. Okay, but it starts with the issue of the facts, and therefore the Gemara says we must assume Ella. We must assume that everybody agrees that the Iker service of the Leviim was the singing, because that then allows for this debate of facts, right? Allows for this reality that some people will claim that the facts are they were slaves, or the facts that they were Yisraelim. That could only be possible assuming that what the Leviim primarily did was the singing. So therefore, everybody has to agree that primarily what the Leviim did, their basic avodah, the basic avodah of the Korban, was the singing. And therefore, there could be a debate, what was the reality in terms of who did the playing of the musical instruments. So, this is the debate. Umar savar hachi havi maaseh, Umar savar hachi havi maaseh. You gotta love it. They're just debating the facts, and nobody's debating any halacha. Everybody agrees in theory it could have been anyone. Okay, but who lemaisa was it? Right, so the music was not the sole, the sole purview of the Leviim. The music could have been anyone. And Lamaisa, who was it? So some say it was this way, some say it was that way. So they're debating the facts, which is a possibility of that range of facts, if we assume that Ikar Shira was Bepeh. You had a question, Dov?
What bothers me a little bit.
Yes.
This is not going to turn on me.
Yeah.
How many generations?
Yes, that's a good question.
No one's grandfather.
Right. Rabbi Meir was a Talmud of Rabbi Akiva, so, it was a good 100, no more, at least let's say 100 years after, okay? How many real facts do we have, 100 by oral history, from 100 years ago, right?
My grandfathers told me about World War I.
Right.
They didn't tell me much.
Right, and I'm sure that somebody else's grandfather who could have told him something else, and some of those facts might conflict with one another, right?
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
How quickly things are lost.
Maybe. Yeah, exactly. All the discussions about the avodah, right?
It's a problem.
All right. So anyway, so now the Gemara says, so they're debating facts. Okay, but now the Gemara, that's not so interesting to just, who cares then? It's just facts, So then it was really Jews weren't historians, okay? So why do we care about facts? So, we care about them in terms of their significance, in terms of halacha, in terms of memory, in terms of religious meaning, but not just stam. So the Gemara is going to do something with it. So the Gemara says like this. So the Gemara says, so what difference does it make? Okay, wonderful. This family, that family, who cares? So the Gemara says, so it says kamiflige, but what it means is their debate would be, or what would emerge from it, this is the way Tosos reads it, what emerged from it would be a nafkamina, an implication of whether the fact that somebody has been on the Duchan was the platform, which would, we call the Duchan where the Kohanim do the Birchas Kohanim, but the Duchan was the platform where the Leviim sang and where they played the musical instruments, okay? So can you assume that if you saw somebody on the Duchan, not sang, but played the musical instruments, you saw somebody on the Duchan playing the musical instruments, can you now assume, I can marry into that guy's family, or I can give that guy and his family meiser? What assumptions can you make about somebody you saw playing the musical instruments on the duchan? Okay, yuchsin is in terms of marrying in, and maser is giving meiser, assuming he's a Levi. Mandam ravadim hayu, the one that says the facts happen to be, I'm sorry to tell you, the facts were they were slaves. So that if you saw somebody playing the musical instruments, you couldn't marry into his family, and you couldn't give him meiser. You couldn't assume that just because he was, I played the musical instruments, and they make that. No, they were slaves. You got to know that. Uman damar Yisrael hayu, the one that says it was good yichus families amongst of Yisrael, not Leviim. Kasaver malim miduchim liyuchsin. If you saw somebody play a musical instrument, then you can marry into his family. He's not a slave, and he's good yichus. Avalol l'maser, he's not a Levi, or certainly not necessarily a Levi, and therefore you cannot give him meiser. And the facts were that they were Levi'im. Because if you guys saw that guy on the Duchan, you can both marry into his family and give him Maser. So it's sometimes, guess what? Important to know the facts. It's like, I spent a whole year teaching Yoredeya in the yeshiva Kashrus. I can tell you any Shach and the Taz and the Pischei Tshuva and Rav Moshe's. Then somebody says, so, Rabbi Linzer, can I buy so-and-so without a hechsher? What's the story with this hechsher? I say, facts? I don't know any facts. You gotta ask somebody else. So, okay, but guess what? It matters to know the facts, because like half of halacha is knowing the facts. So so you know what? It matters to know who are the people playing there. Can I marry into that family? How good is the hechsher on the people that are playing? So that's where it matters. But it's not a debate of what the halacha is. The halacha is that anybody could play a musical instrument because the ikar shira was bepeh, not bekli. Okay, so that's what the Gemara. That's what the Gemara says emerges from this debate. And by the way, that's how the Rambam rules as well. The Rambam rules ikar shira is bepeh, and that the non-Levi'im could play the musical instruments. Okay, so now the Gemara continues. It says like this. Okay. So the Gemara says like this: Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba Amar. So that was an attempt to say that the debate about can you play the musical instruments on Shabbat was about playing them with the korban, whether the ikar shira was bepeh or b'kli. But the Gemara anyway sort of said, looks like what emerges from this. It looks like everybody should admit that ikar shira was bepeh. So yeah,
we have the answer to this in the nusach of our tefillah, right? Hayom Yom.
Oh, you mean that with Levi'im Omrim? Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like nobody debates that the Levi'im were the ones that did the Shirah. That's quite fascinating. You're right. And the debate is whether they were the ones that did the music instruments. So, but it's true, but the Gemara still thinks it's possible that Ikar Shirah was Bekli, even though they let the Shirah still be the, purview, only the Levi'im. It's true. I mean, it's like, just because if A then B doesn't mean if B then A. So just because it was the Levi'im does not mean that was the Ikar. But it is interesting that the only debate of where there are other people that did it was by the music, not by the singing. Okay, so the Gemara says like this. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, so now Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba says, so machlokas b'shir shashoiva, that debate of can you play the musical instruments on Shabbat, that was a debate about the music that accompanied, or the chalil that accompanied the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Rabbi Yehuda savar Simcha Yitera Nami Dochet HaShabbat. Rabbi Yehuda says, I know it's not directly part of the korban. It's just about having the jet of the extra simcha, ushaftemayim b'sasod, etc. But nevertheless, simcha in the Beis Hamikdash, that also can be done on Shabbat. Again, Dochet HaShabbat is a strange term because at the end of the day, it's just a rabbinic problem. Okay, but okay, yes, even though it's Simchas Beis HaShoeva, but it's in the Beis HaMikdash, that can be done on Shabbat. Okay, Rabbanan Savri, Simcha Yitera Eino Dochet HaShabbat. No, just for this idea of having extra joy with the Simchas Beis HaShoeva, that does not allow you to play musical instruments on Shabbat. That's the debate. Aval B'shir Shel Korban, when it comes to doing the song, the singing that accompanies the korban, everybody would agree that is an avodah and it overrides Shabbat, and therefore everybody would agree that you could play musical instruments with the korbanot when they are brought on Shabbat. Now here, the astute person will say, 1 minute, didn't we just seem to conclude a second ago that Ikar Shira was what? Bepeh. Right, and the musical instruments could even be done by the avadim, etc., etc. And here we're saying, but by the way, when it comes to the question of doing it on Shabbat, right, everybody says that the playing the musical instruments is an avodah and can be done on Shabbat. So I thought you said that, if it's done by the avadim, it's not really an avodah. Anyway, it's done by the avadim, it's not really an avodah, and what does that mean? That everybody says that the playing of the musical instruments can be done on Shabbat. So there are, I would say, 3 answers to this, and the best answer is implicit in the Rambam. One answer is it doesn't really mean it's an avodah, but it means that, let's face it, you're not dealing a real Shabbos violation here. Like I said, it's a rabbinic issue of playing a music instrument on Shabbat. What's the big deal anyway? So what it just means is, okay, even though it's there to accompany the singing, and the singing is the Ikar, as we said, it's not the music and the Ikar, but it's enough part of the avodah of the korbanot. It's not a big enough deal. It's really not such a Shabbos problem anyway, so fine, it can be done. Okay, so that's one explanation. That it doesn't really mean avodahi. It just means, well, look, it's not really such a big deal here anyway, and we're going to let it, when it comes with the korban, we'll let it override Shabbat. A second answer, which is maybe a variation of the first, is, can you sort of call it a part of the avodah without saying that the ikar shira, maybe this is really just a variation of the first, but it's really saying when it's being done, are you yotze without the musical instruments? Yes. Do the musical instruments need to be leviim? No. But when they are done, they are incorporated into the avodah, as opposed to the music you play in the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. That's all preliminary, or that's all some non-avodah simcha that's in the Beis HaMikdash that maybe is about eventually doing an avodah. But here, it's at the time of the korban, and it accompanies the singing of the Levim, so it becomes incorporated into the avodah. Okay, so that's another explanation. But the point is, you can allow it to be done on Shabbat, even if it's not really an avodah, because at the end of the day, anyway, we're only dealing with a rabbinic problem. Rambam says something much more interesting. The Rambam says that although the playing of the musical instrument is not an avodah and can be done by non-Leviim, he says when it comes to Yamim Tovim and Rosh Chodesh, he says, I mentioned this yesterday, there's a mitzvah min HaTorah not only to play music that accompanies singing, but there's a mitzvah min HaTorah to blow the chatzotzrot. And that, he says, can only be done by the Kohanim, which is fascinating, because we tend to forget about the chatzotzrot that are in the Torah. Then right after saying that there's this biblical mitzvah to do the chatzotzrot with korbanot on Yom Tov and Rosh Chodesh, he says, and this is now basing himself on another Mishnah elsewhere. He says, and on basically all the Yomim Tovim, there was a special playing of the Chalil. Remember the name of our parak, Chalil? Apparently a musical instrument that was not played with the singing of the Levi'im during, the normal days. But on Yontif, they would actually play the Chalil to accompany the Levi'im. And he says, and that is avodahi, and that can only be played by Levi'im. Wow. So according to the Rambam, there actually are two levels. There's the general music that accompanies the singing that comes on a daily basis, and that's not an avodah. That's basically about the singing, and anybody could play that. But for Yontiv, there was a special use of a special instrument that was signified somehow that it was special because it was Yontiv. It's interesting to think about that. It's Yontiv, we're going to add some special, people to the orchestra. We're going to have an expanded orchestra because it's Yontiv. And it seems to be modeled after the idea of Chatzotzrot. So the same way on Yontiv, there's this Chatzotzrot that are by the Kohanim, again, not accompanying the singing, just making some blasts. But on Yontiv also, we have an expanded orchestra, and that extra playing, which is, I think, sort of modeled or inferred from the idea of the Chatzotzrot, this extra instrument, that actually is unique to the Levi'im, and that is an avodah. So it's quite interesting how the Rambam says, on the one hand, we said Ikar Shira was Bepeh, and then a sentence later we said, oh, by the way, the Chalil that was played, the Chalil that was played, that was Ikar Avodah, and therefore it was still Chet HaShabbat.
But so every day of the week,
yes,
korbanot, and the were singing,
yeah,
there was some ragamuffin orchestra playing.
Yeah.
Right? And on Shabbos and Yontif, there was Chatzot. And Chatzot was also every day?
No, Chatzot was only, not Shabbos, Yontif and Rosh Chodesh.
Just to add to the Simcha.
Yeah, well, I don't know why, but because it's in the Torah. We could have another discussion about those psukim in the Torah. Okay, but it was not part of the singing. Right? They would just do independent Chatzotzrot, and then what you would also do on Yontif, but not Rosh Chodesh, so even a further subset, was that you would add Chalilim to the orchestra.
The place was so... you didn't know where to look first.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but that is, I think, very interesting because, again, the name of the parak is Hachalio, and again, elsewhere in we find that a particular emphasis of the, in another Masechet of the unique times when they would use the Chalil to accompany the singing of the korbanot. And the Rambam actually makes something special about that. It wasn't just stam, let's add some music instruments, but it actually was specifically a Levim avodah, even though the normal musical instruments were not. And that's how the Rambam reads this idea here.
So when non-Orthodox synagogues play wind instruments on Shabbos,
yes,
shuls, for example,
yes,
the issue is more what it symbolizes in terms of the rejection of rabbinic authority?
I'm not going to get into that. What it terms is that it wasn't the Beis Hamikdash. I mean, here we're talking about within the Beis Hamikdash. By the way, though, I would say that reading of the Rambam might lead to the conclusion that on Yom Tov they did. I said they added instruments to the orchestra, but it might actually lead to the conclusion that they didn't have any of the other instruments of the orchestra. They just had the chalil. Because if you read it that way, meaning the first way I read it was, okay, well, it's not such a big Shabbos problem anyway. So even if Ikashir is Bepeh, you can still play the musical instruments on Shabbat when it comes with the Korban. Okay, but this way of reading it is no. The normal instruments were not allowed. Ikashir is Bepeh. The one thing that they did was just the Chalil. So that's like a different image, but that could emerge from the Rambam's approach. Okay, that wasn't for Shabbos and Yom Tov. All right, so now we move on. So the Gemara says like this, okay? Okay, Meitve says the Gemara, Shir Shoeva Dochet HaShabbat, Divrei Reb Yosef Reb Yehuda. So the song of the Shoeva, the whatever, overrides Shabbat. That's what Reb Yosef Reb Yehuda says. It doesn't even override Yom Tov. So you see very clearly that the debate of Reb Yosef Reb Yehuda and the Chachamim was about the music of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, not about the music that accompanied Korban. So the Gemara says, Tiyufta de Rav Yosef Tiyufta. That's a complete contradiction of Rav Yosef. It shows that, who said that the debate was only about the normal, it was about the instruments of Shabbat, of the normal Korban that came with the Korban. Here you see it's about the instruments of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. So the Gemara says, Lema b'shir shoeva hu depligi, avo b'shir shel korban divrei hakol dochet haShabbat. So it sounds like, says the Gemara, that they debate whether you can do musical instruments during the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, and it would sound also, perhaps we could infer as well, that when it came to the normal music that accompanied korbanot, everybody would agree that that could be done on Shabbat. Right? It sounds like they're only debating whether you could do it for the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. So Lema Tavi Tiyufta Rav Yosef Petarti. So maybe it contradicts both aspects of Rav Yosef. Meaning Rav Yosef said they are debating the music with korbanot, and everybody agrees with shoeva it's off limits. Here it says they're debating shoeva. But it sounds so that showed that not everybody agrees shoeva is a problem, but it also seems to imply that everybody agrees korbanot is okay, which contradicts his other statement that he says they debate korbanot. So the Gemara says no. Rav Yosef would say to you, no, they debate both issues. Can you do it for the shoeva, and can you do it with the korbanot? Again, on Shabbat. So why are they focusing on the Simchat Beit HaShoeva? To show you the strength of Rabbi Yosef Reb Yehuda's position. Not only does he allow you to play on Shabbat with the Korban, he allows you to play on Shabbat even for the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. So, but maybe it's not a complete contradiction for Rabbi Yosef. Maybe they debate both issues. The Gemara says no, it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like they only debate Shoeva. How do you know that? Because of the following. The Gemara says, "V'haktani," our Mishnah says, "Zehu chalil shabeit hashoeva." This issue that we're talking about, that the music can't be on Shabbat and on Yom Tov, that is the flute of the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. She'eino docha lo ata Shabbat v'lo ata Yom Tov. That doesn't override Shabbos and Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, what's the implication of that line? Zehu. This is the one that doesn't override Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Zehu te'eino docha. This flute doesn't override Shabbos and Yom Tov. Avod de Korban, this strong implication of the Mishnah is there's another flute, the one that comes with the Korbanot, that's dochet, that does override Shabbos and Yom Tov. So Mani, who is the author of this Mishnah that says, yes, it doesn't override on Simchas Beis HaShoeva, yes, it overrides by Korban. Mani, name a Rabbi Yosef Reb Yehuda. If it's Rabbi Yosef Reb Yehuda, he says that you can play the music instruments even on Shabbos for Simchas Beis HaShoeva. Elalav Rabbanan. It must be the rabbis who we know say you can't play it for Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And you see that the rabbis who say you can't play it in Simchas Beis HaShoeva, and that's what they say in our Mishnah, said this is the one you don't play on Shabbat, which means that the Korban one you do play on Shabbat. So the Gemara says, so Elalav Rabbanan, v'tiyufta de Rav Yosef Petarti tiyufta. It's a double contradiction of Rav Yosef. Number one, you see that Rav Yosef Reb Yehuda says you can play it on Shabbat for Simchas, even for Simchas Beis HaShoeva. And number two, you see that everybody agrees that you can, that when it comes to the Korban, you can play, everyone agrees you can play it on Shabbat. So now the Gemara says, "My time at demand Amar Iker Shira Bekli." Now to get back to that debate, what's the reason of the one that says the basic shira is the music? Because the verse says, Yomi Chizkiah said to bring the burnt offering on the altar, and when the olah was beginning to be burnt, Shir Hashem, the song of God began. The song actually comes at the pouring of the wine, which came when the korban was being offered, not in this pasuk. The song of God and the trumpets, Klei David Melech Yisrael, with the instruments of David, king of Israel. Interesting, associating them with King David. So therefore you see that it said that the sound began, and then it mentioned the music. So you see the word song here, right? What does shir mean in the Torah? The shir has a lot of meanings. Could mean poetry, could mean song, could mean music. So it says here, you see it's using the word shir with a korban, and it says the shir began, and they began playing the music instruments. So shir means the music. That's what shir is. It's the music. Okay. My time of demand Amar Ika Shir B'Peh. What's the reason if you say it's basically the song? So Tichsiv, the verse says, Vayi ke'echad l'mechatzitzrimim l'meshorim u'lehashmiya kol echad. It was as one, those playing on the trumpets and those giving forth song, to make one sound. So Meshorerim, so we would read it like the accompaniment of the Chatzotzrot with the song. But again, what the Gemara here is saying is, it's interesting, right? At some degree, it's also saying that it's a question of terminology, meaning not just like, okay, the way you could frame it is, what was central? Was it the song or the music? Here it's almost saying like, what does the word shir mean? Is the basic use of the word shir in the context of korban, does that mean singing or does that mean music? So the first verse indicated that the word shir meant music. This verse said that, that the word, it meant music. This verse is saying that, is understanding that the word, the combination of the mechatzitzrim and the mishorerim somehow understands that it means that the chatzotzrot are accompanying the singing, and the word shir means song. So Rashi says, now why, Rashi sort of says, why is it? I mean, why can't we say, it means that the music combined with the chatzotzrot. So Rashi again makes the point that I mentioned before with the Rambam. Trumpets are not musical instruments that sort of blend in with other musical instruments. Okay? Trumpets come by themselves. Okay, so that was the whole point I made before about the Rambam. So when it says l'machatzitzrim u'mishorim, it means those were two, that they weren't like a blending of musical instruments. It was trumpets and mishorerim, so it's understanding that that's independent, and that shira means singing. Okay? I don't know, not so explicit, but that's how the Gemara is getting it. So that shows you ikar shira b'peh. The idach nami haksiv vayomer Chizkiyahu. What about the verse that mentioned the music together with shir, and sounded like that shir was the music? So the Gemara says, Hachikamar, Heichel Shir Hashem Bepeh, the singing began verbally, Al Yedei, with the accompaniment of Klei David Melech Yisrael, B'Sumei Kala. Yes, there was a focus there, or there was a talk there about the instruments, but it meant the instruments were accompanying the singing, not that the shir was the instruments. Somehow the word mishorerim very much suggests to the Gemara the idea of singing, not the idea of music. Hachikamer. Mishorerim, dumya de mechatzitzrim. And now it finally takes a step back. You know what? Maybe not. Maybe the word mishorerim is just like the word mechatzitzrim, people playing the trumpets. Ma mechatzitzrim bekli, af mishorerim bekli. Maybe it means that the same way the word mechatzitzrim means trumpet players, mishorerim doesn't mean singers. Maybe mishorerim means players of musical instruments. Okay, so the Gemara ends with a question. But again, I want to point out what's fascinating, which is, back and forth we say is ikar shir b'kli, ikar shir b'peh. The conclusion seems to be ikar shir is b'peh. But again, we sort of said, but you can play, we also concluded very strongly that it seems very clear that you can play musical instruments with the korbanot on Shabbat. And at the same time, ikar shir is b'peh. So again, how does that balance out? And I just remind you of the 3 points I said. One is, okay, it's not such a problem playing musical instruments anyway. It's only Durabban. I mean, it's not a problem. In the base of Mikdash, it's not such a problem. It's Durabban. So, okay, it doesn't have to be such an avoda. Well, the other is, like, okay, when it's done, it's incorporated, as we said. It accompanies the song, and it becomes like the avoda, and so on, and that gives it enough weight. So maybe those are two variations of a similar idea. And the third is the fascinating idea of the Rambam, that there was a separate status to the musical instruments that they played on Shabbos and Yantiv. That the normal music was not an avodah, But excuse me, not Shabbos on Yontiv. But the music on Yontiv that was played with the Chalil, that was an avodah, that was only the V'im, and that had a special status, and that was what was docheh and allowed to be played. Yes.
I want to ask about the language. Beta Shoeva, was it a separate structure?
No, no, we're going to get to the description right now, but no. I mean, it's a good point. Why does it say Simchat Beit HaShoeva? Not if you have the gears of Simchat Beit Chashuva, like the Gemara says, so that's different. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why the word bias there. It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously because it connects to the Beis HaMikdash, but there is no physical structure. Let's take a look now as we get to actually discussing the Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Okay? So, Min shelo ra'a Simchat Beit HaShoeva, lo ra'a Simcha miyamav. If you've never seen the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, you've never really seen a good Jewish Simcha, let's say. Okay, what a real party is. The Motzei Yom Tov HaRishon Shel Chag. Now, again, we just got through saying that they would not do it the night on Yom Tov and Shabbos. So, I mean, on the one hand, it should be noted that we've been talking about where they play the musical instruments. But the other thing that you couldn't do on Shabbos, of course, was you couldn't carry the water. You had to draw it from before. But in theory, you could have done a Simchas Beis HaShoeva the first night of Yontiv, because you can carry on Yontiv, and you can go ahead and you can party throughout the night without the musical instruments, okay? But this Mishnah seems to suggest that when you say you didn't play the musical instruments for the Simchat Beit HaShoeva, it also meant you basically didn't have the party, right? That's never said explicitly, but that's interesting. Would they have a party at all the first night of Yontiv? This Mishnah makes it pretty clear. The answer is no. They would start the partying, only Motzei Yontiv, and that's when you could bring in the musical instruments. Okay, so that just shows you that if there's no music, no party. So anyway, the Gemara says like this. Okay, so B'Motzei Yontiv HaRishon Shel Chag, so the first night following Yontiv, Yardu Lezrat Nashim. So they would go down into the women's section, and they fix it up real nice. Okay, we'll see in the Gemara what that means. Fix it up real nice. Menorot shel zahav hayusham, and they would, because the women's section basically served, or the women's azara courtyard basically served as a type of a social hall. Okay, and that's where sort of everybody gathered before going into the actual azara and the bringing of the korban. So that's what they use. They use your social hall for the party. Okay, so menorot shel zahav hayusham. There were golden candelabras. I mean, not technically, like obviously not, like the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash itself, maybe evocative of it, but anyway. But whatever they were huge candelabras. The arba'as falim shel zahav b'rashehem, and they had 4 big funnels of gold at their heads, which might mean that there were only a 4-branched menorah. Maybe it means the funnels, fed to all of the branches. The arba'as sulamot l'kol echad ve'echad, and each funnel had 4 ladders leading up to it. You can obviously realize that this is a little bit stylized and not exactly literal. Okay, anyway, the arba yiladim, what?
They translated it as bowls.
Bowls. Okay, well, I guess it's a difference about whether you're seeing the funnels feeding into a receptacle or whether they actually are the receptacle. Yeah, so bowls might be a better translation. Yeah? Okay.
It's like street lamps.
Okay, right.
Photograph.
Right. Okay. So bowls might be better because it seems like this means this is the receptacle, and it was maybe like a 4-branched candelabra. 4 ladders leading up to each one of the bowls. And 4 of the young, either children or young men of the Kohanim, ubiyadehem kadim, went up maybe each ladder, or 1 per ladder. Ubiyadehem kadim shame'av esun log, and each one had a picture of 120 log. Now, let's think how big that is. A log is about 12 ounces, 14 ounces. So 120 of that is 1,400 to 80, about 1,700 ounces. Okay, I don't know, what does that translate into in terms of how many ounces in a gallon? 64 ounces in a gallon? 128 ounces in a gallon? 128. And how much did I just say this would be? 1,700. So we're like 15 gallons. Do you think a kid, even a young man, in the normal 15 gallons?
How many gallons is one of those jugs from water that you get, the mineral water that's inside those big jugs?
Think about a gallon of milk. Think about trying to get 15 of them.
How many ounces load?
14.
Okay, 1680.
Divided by what?
Um,
What do we say? 128? 128 ounces to a gallon?
13.
13 gallons.
13.125.
13 gallons. Okay.
All
All right. I don't think this is literal. All right. Okay. 120 lo. Kain metilin lekol safal v'safal. That went into, maybe it meant multiple pictures, multiple trips, anyway, and that they ultimately, each bowl contained, 17, or whatever it said, 14 gallons. From the torn strips of the used out, underwear and belts of the Kohanim, from the worn out clothing of the Kohanim, from then they would make strips, and they would use those as wicks, and they would use those to light to light in the bowls. There was no courtyard in all of Jerusalem that was not lit up from the light coming from this rejoicing of the Beit HaShoeva. And righteous people and people of deeds would be dancing bifneihem, in front of them. Interesting who the them are, in front of everybody, I guess. With torches of light, or torches of fire. Okay? And would say, as they're juggling these torches, would be singing praises and songs. Rashi, nice little description in Rashi of trying to describe what juggling is. If you look at Rashi, Rashi says, Zorkino tan klape ma'ala, you'd throw them up into the air, Mekablino tam, and you'd receive it. V'yesh shebeki'in la, so it came by arba avukot, obishmona, v'zorik zo, mekabel zo. V'zorik zo, mekabel zo. So it's interesting little description of juggling. Okay. Anyway, Valavi'im between a road to Binavalim, Bimitzaltime, Bechatzot, Bechleishir, below Mispar, and Valim were playing all these different types of musical instruments, cymbals and flutes and trumpets. On the 15 steps that went down from the Ezrat Yisrael to the Ezrat Nashim. Ma'alot, or Shirei HaMa'alot Shebetehillim. Corresponding to the 15 songs of ascent in Tehillim, there were 15 steps of ascent going from Ezrat Nashim to Ezrat Yisrael. Shalehem Levi'im Omdim B'Klei Shir V'Omrim Shira. And those Levi'im would be stand and with their musical instruments and do their singing. Now, of course, the question is, we just got through talking about the singing of the Levi'im and the playing of musical instruments that would accompany the Korbanot. But this wasn't, if you think about the way things look. Right? I'll do a side view. Those are 15 steps. Okay. So this is Ezrat Nashim. Right? This is Ezrat Israel. There would be a whole gate there to get in. Okay? Right? This is like Sharei Nitnur or whatever. And this is your east, right? And then here you have, Ezrat Yisrael is small, but whatever. But anyway, and then you have, the Ezrat Kohanim, and you've got your Mizbeach, and you've got your whole thing,
Is that
right?
east or south?
What? This is north. This is west.
Right, so now that's where
Okay.
southern excavation.
You come, right? You come in here, you go up, you go through Sharniknur, right? You got it? Yes? Okay, so anyway, so here's where you have their party, right? And here, right, is where you have the steps leading down. So they would be standing here, everybody would be partying here, the band would be in the front, okay, basically, and they'd be standing and singing here, and everybody would be here having their party. So the question is, if this is where the Levim stood with their music and their song, and the Korbanot are being brought here, it doesn't exactly work, right? You got a wall here, you got whatever. So basically, Rashi says, this is not the Duchan. This is not where they stood for the Korbanot. Where they stood for the Korbanot to play the song and to play the music and the song was over here. And as we even said, it wasn't necessarily the Levim playing the music. But don't confuse, as Rashi, where they're standing here for the party to where they would stand for the Korbanot. Okay? All right. So, okay. Now, okay. So now 2 kohanim stood at the top of the steps, at this gate that basically would go, would lead out of Ezrat Yisrael, and then you'd go down the steps to go to Ezrat Nashim, as I just demonstrated. And they would have 2 trumpets in their hands. Karaha Gever, then the cock crowed, so it was beginning to be daybreak, wasn't sunrise yet. Tiku ve'riu v'tiku, they did tkiya trua tkiya. We've already mentioned tkiya trua tkiya before. That would accompany the pouring of the wine of the water. We mentioned tkiya trua tkiya that would accompany the waving of the the whole arava ritual. So here you had a tkiya trua tkiya, but this was more for the simcha that preceded, and they would do that when they're starting to ready, because what they're about to do, you understand, is they partied throughout the night, and then at daybreak they did a whole big procession to draw the water. So that was the shoeva. They actually did the drawing of the water. It culminated in the drawing of the water, then bringing the water into the mikdash and doing the pouring. So when they, to begin the procession, to transition from the party to begin the procession, they did the tkiya, trua tkiya at the top of the steps. Okay? They got to the 10th step going down, whether it means which way are you counting 10? Anyway, they did another trua tkiya. Azara. Then they got to the actual courtyard itself, the Ezrat Nashim. They did tkiya trua tkiya. Okay, people take out that next line. It isn't in the Mishnah, and anyway, because it's redundant, because they're already at the Azara, so we'll just skip the next line. And they kept on doing tkiya trua tkiya until they came to the gate leading out of Ezrat Nashim and Hayotzei Mimizrach. Okay, so they led to the easternmost gate, and then you're going from here. Right here, you're on Temple Mount. Right, so you're going to go here. You're going to go down Temple Mount, and you're going to go out. Okay, so to the Shiloah. Okay. Now, when they got to the east gate out of Ezrat Nashim, they turned their face back, facing west. The Amru, and they said, looking at the Beit HaMikdash, Avotenu shayu b'makom hazeh, our forefathers that were in this place, meaning in the Bayit Rishon, who achoreihem. This is actually a description that we find in the Tanakh about what was done in the Bayit Rishon, but when they were Ovdei Avodah Zarah, achoreihem el heichal, they would have their backs facing the heichal, upneihem kedma, and their front to the east, and mishachavim kedma lashemesh, and they would bow down east to the sun. They would be rejecting the temple and worshiping the sun. But we are to God. To God is our eyes. And they would repeat it and say, Anu liyah, we are to God, and our eyes are to God. Now that's all quite fascinating, right? Because it's like, why evoke specifically that at this moment? I mean, it's one thing to say you don't walk out of the Beis HaMikdash with your back to the Beis HaMikdash. You turn around and you walk backwards. Why to evoke, the contrast of Hosseinu and the way we are? Also, if you remember, also like when it did the whole thing about the Hoshana Rabbah, Yofi L'cha Mizbeach, all of this like personification, and sort of talking, it's making these declarations. I don't know the answer. I'm just saying it's quite fascinating. Like you normally don't find that, right? In the middle of the avodah, making a point. I'd like to make a point here, or whatever it is. It's quite fascinating. Yes.
That's really, there's a thread of that, like the thread that comes from the tefillin for the egg, that's reminiscent of the egel, and the egel of the miluim.
Yeah. I'm not talking about. I know, but I'm talking about making a declaration, or like when they said at the end of like, by the Hoshana Rabbah, Yofi L'cha Mizbeach, right? What's that about? Yeah. I don't know. What? It's interesting. Yeah, that's true. Bringing like a narrative into this story, the same way you have a narrative into the Haggadah.
You're saying they speak to inanimate objects.
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, here they're sort of speaking to no one. They're saying, Avotenu hayu, liyam mizbeach, whatever. That was more speaking to the altar. Tanu Rabbanan, Misha lo ra Gemara, Misha lo ra simchas beis shoeva, lo ra simcha miyama. Misha lo ra Yerushalayim b'tifarta. Lo ra. So now that we're talking about how amazing the simchas beis shoeva is, let's talk about other things that were, you should only have seen it. It was so amazing. If you had not seen Jerusalem in its glory, you've never seen an amazing city. You might think, Rome or whatever, Paris. Yeah, you don't know anything. True glory was what Yerushalayim used to be like. If you never saw the Beis HaMikdash when it was really built, you never saw anything. Taj Mahal. That's all, secular beauty. You haven't really seen real beauty unless you've seen the Beis HaMikdash. What? Okay, fine. Not Jewish religious. Okay, anyway. All right. Mahi. So now, but it's quite fascinating. I mean, I was sort of trying to give a nice religious spin on this, but the Gemara is actually going to try to explain in very physical and aesthetic ways what was so beautiful about the Beis Hamikdash. Mahi, what's this amazing thing about it? So Amar Rabbi V'Temer Rav Chizda, or which one, first of all, are we talking about, first or second? Zebinin Hordus. It was the second one, and when it was Hordus, actually, improved the second one. B'mai Banye, with what did he build it? Amar Rabba Be'avnei Sheisha umirma, with marble and mirma, which Rashi says is like a white marble. Ika da'amri, some say be'avnei sheisha kuchla, with blue marble, umirma, and white marble. Apik safa v'ayil safa, like one edge would go in and one edge would go out, like it would be sort of, protruding in and out. They do that sometimes, like on facades, right? It alternates or whatever, and out. And that way it could be, except the plaster, I guess, because if it's, that's how you do it. Like certainly when you do it on the horizontal plane, like when you lay bricks, right? You don't lay them one on top of another, right? You, what's it called? You alternate or whatever. Anyway. Okay. Then he thought that he would be coated with gold. Amalei Rabbanan, the rabbi said to him, right, getting the rabbis right up there with right in there in conversation with Hordis, okay, Shavke, no, you know what, leave it the way it is. The Hachik Shapir Tvei, it's better this way. It looks like waves of the sea. You got blue and white and jutting in and out, and it looks very beautiful, looks very peaceful, looks like waves of the sea.
That may be the only time you ever listen to rabbis.
Yeah. Tanya, we done in Bryce, Rabbi Yomi, Mishalo Ra'a Dioplostin, if you never saw the Dioplostin, which is clearly some Greek word, does it tell you what that word means?
From a Greek word meaning double and colonnade.
That's what Rashi says. So he's okay. So Rashi says so it's some double colonnade, some huge like a Colosseum that had with a double colonnade, but actually we're going to find out it was basically a shul, a huge Colosseum that was used as a synagogue in Alexandria in Egypt. Lo Rabbi Chvodan Shel Yisrael. You haven't seen, now this is an interesting shift. Not you haven't seen a gorgeous shul, but you haven't seen the glory of the Jewish people because of what that was like to be in that shul. Okay, what does that mean? Amru kimin basiliki gdola haita. It was like a huge basilica, a huge like a castle. Stav lifni mistav, a double stoa. Pa'amim shayu ba, and there were times, or there were more. Now our guess is shishim riba, 60,000 times 600,000 times 600,000, which is I don't even know how much, 36 billion or something. The actual girsa is it is like either shishim ribo or double or kiflayim, or either 1.2 million or 600,000, not 600,000 times 600,000. Kiflayim kiyotze Mitzrayim, double those that left Egypt. There were 1.2 million Jews there. Charlie will probably tell us that there weren't 1.2 million people in the world at that time.
No, there were.
There were, maybe, at most.
Roman Empire population estimate about 50 million.
50 million?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, there was nowhere there was 1.2 million Jews, I'll tell you that. And there were 71 cathedrals of gold, meaning golden seats. Can I get Ayin Aleph Cathedra or Ayin Aleph Shel Sanhedrin Gedolah, corresponding to the 71 members of the Sanhedrin. Now again, the word ribo is a later addition. There should be no seat was less than 21 kikarezav talents of gold. But if that wasn't enough of an exaggeration, it's not just 21 talents of gold, it was 21 times 10,000, 210,000 talents of gold. So anyway, you got to keep your exaggerations in the realm of realistic. So it's like that story that these Hasidim are debating how great their Rebbe is. So one says, my Rebbe is so great that he can stand on a bench and see from one end of the world to the next. Another guy says, why does he have to stand on a bench? So he says, he wants to do his Neis B'derech Teva. So anyway, we have to, let's keep our exaggerations within some reasonable limits here. Okay? 1.2 million, not 1.2 billion. 21, not 210,000. Anyway, 21 talents of gold. And ita, and there was a wooden bima in the middle of the synagogue, in the middle of this like Colosseum. The Chazan HaKnesset Omed Aleha, and the Chazan here, which is not it's not the Shliach Tzibor, it's the sexton, the Gabbai, would stand on this platform. Thus, meaning the point of this platform is not necessarily where the davening took place. It just made him very high, very visible. He would stand on a high platform in the middle. The Hasudarin biyado, and he had like flags in his hands, like the guys that signal the planes. The Kivin Shigiu La'anot Amen, when it was the time to say Amen, nobody could hear, right? I mean, a huge whatever, yeah, how could you hear everything that was said? So Hala Menif Basudar, so this guy would do the waving, maybe different wavings for different parts of the davening. They call Amonim Amen, and then everybody could say Amen because he couldn't hear anything, but at least you would know when to say Amen.
How do you say Amen to a bracha?
So Tosh was asking an interesting question. Can you infer from here that if you said Amen at the end of a bracha, even if you didn't hear it, that you'd be Yotzei? It sounds like that, but there's a Gemaras that say you're not Yotzei unless you hear it. So Tosh says, okay, nobody really had to be Yotzei. We wanted to say Amen because that was the way they participated in the davening, by saying Amen, but it didn't necessarily mean you were Yotzei, but it's an interesting halachic question. This is in the base of, no, in Alexandria, in Egypt. Right, this huge synagogue, okay, right, and they're doing this waving or whatever. Okay, the lo ayu yoshvin uravim, and it's not like they would be mixed seating. Now it's like, oh, is this going to be a source for separate seating? No, the source for mechitza is going to be tomorrow. Okay, but here muravim means something else. They wouldn't have mixed seating. Zehavim bifnei atzman, goldsmiths in one area, ksafim bifnei atzman, silversmiths in another area, unefachim bifnei atzman, and ironsmiths in a different area, the tarsiim bifnei atzman, and coppersmiths in another area, the gardiim bifnei atzman, and weavers in their section, uchshani nichnas. And you know what? We talk about how you shouldn't be schmoozing and shul or whatever. Actually, it's quite fascinating because they've done lots of studies on ancient synagogues, and there was major function of the synagogue was a social gathering place. So it says it's a good way to to do business. Is that's where you all find the people you need to be talking to. So here it was very helpful because you would know which section to go to. So here you would be. You need somebody to hire you on to be an assistant for a silversmith. So you go to the silversmith section, and you go there, and look at the tremendous chesed that came out of it. Doing business is a mitzvah. There's a famous Rabbeinu Tam. He says, finding parnasa for a Jew is tzarchei mitzvah. It seems like you're allowed to do it as a tzarch mitzvah, not a tzarch mitzvah. So, have a very positive spin. I'm sure we all know, right, the joke, right, about the guy that he needs to go in to talk to his business partner. It's Yom Kippur, and he, you know the joke, right? He needs to go in, but he doesn't have, he's not Jewish or whatever. He doesn't have a ticket. So the guard at the door won't let him in. He doesn't have a ticket. He doesn't have a seat. So he said, please, it's like an emergency. I just took for 2 seconds. Please let me get it. I said, fine, you can go in. But remember, no praying. So anyway.
This is actually a good Talmudic source for the 20th century Jewish center idea.
Exactly, but it actually was this idea of the synagogue as Jewish center is ancient. It's like one of the primary functions. Actually, the whole question, is it called Beit Knesset, right? Or is it, what was the other term used for it? Beit Knesset means a gathering place, Anyway, okay, so anyway, it says...
Separate seating means by profession.
Right, exactly. Amar Guild. Amar Rabbi, said Rabbi, let's just finish this up. Vikulu Katlinu Alexandrus Mokdon. And they were all wiped out by, now our girsa is Alexandrus Mokdon with Alexander of Macedonia, who did not wipe out the Jews, and off by 300 years. So if you take a look, there's side notes where others cross out the word Mokdon, then they say that it's an Alexander who was one of the Caesars, or a Roman, or basically they attribute it to either a Roman general or a Roman Caesar. That clearly it was not.
Steinsaltz says it was probably
Trajan, right? There was another. The Grozgir says Trajan. Okay. Severus. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, my time at Anshu. Now, why were they punished if it was such an amazing Jewish community? So now it's quite fascinating because we know that these community in Alexandria was pretty Hellenized and was not very frum and observant and so on. Now you could easily, if you're looking for a reason of why they were wiped out, talk about their degree of assimilation, etc. But it's quite fascinating what the Gemara is going to answer. Why were they wiped out? Mishum da'avriya haikra, they transgressed the verse that said, Lo tosifim lashu b'derech haze'od, because they went back to Egypt.
Wow.
The inu hadr, and they went back. Asu. Now, when this, whoever it was, Trajan came, let's say, he saw that they were reading in a book, in a sefer. He found a kid, let's say, there are often stories like you find a kid reading a pasuk, and that's like an omen, was reading the verse, God will bring upon you a nation from far away. Amar, so he said to himself, look, Michti, Hahu Gavra, this person, meaning me, I should have, my ship should have taken 10 days to get here. A wind blew, Yomi, and it came in 5 days. So it must be that God was bringing me here. And the end of the verse is that he's going to take you into captivity. So, Nafal Alai V'Chatlinu, he saw it as a Siman Min HaShamayim, and he wiped them out. So that's a lovely way to end that story. Anyway, we'll pick up here tomorrow.
Didn't Yirmiyahu descend to Egypt?
Yeah.